So, as part of this summer series that we're doing, somebody's yelling. Hope everything's okay. My kids are 43 and 41. It's not one of mine. So, anyways, part of this summer series, we're going to have some conversation about race in America this morning. And so I want to invite three friends to come up here and join me this morning. Lakeiya Maxwell, Ken Harvey, and Jim Mitchum, if you guys would come. And as they come, I just want to preface this conversation with a couple of things. You can clap for them coming up here. As they come, I just want to preface this conversation with a couple of things. One is that we're not really doing this morning to try to nail down and answer, every question across the culture. I've been in a lot more conversations about racial questions in the last few years than ever before in my earlier stages of life. And one of the things I've learned is that we often have these conversations in a kind of abstracted way without taking into account real people's experience. And so part of what we're going to try to do this morning is try to look at the experience of life, the experience in this culture, experience in American life. They're going to tell some stories that are going to help us kind of maybe glimpse what that looks like from a different perspective. Jesus gave us the ultimate exhortation to empathy when he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if I had certain hard experiences in my life, I would of course want other people to try to look at those experiences through my lenses, what I experienced. We're going to try to do that with these brothers and this sister this morning. So mostly what we're going to do is we're going to hear stories. The other thing I want to do before we jump in is just acknowledge that the racial conversations we're having this morning, they also include conversations about immigrants, but I could not fit into one 30-minute conversation on Sunday morning, a conversation about being black in America and about being an immigrant in America. So that's just too much to fit in. But I am going to come back to the immigration thing a little bit when we get to kind of wrapping up the conversation toward the end. So, but we found out first service, didn't we, how fast the time goes. And so we have a limited time, and so we're just going to jump in, and what I would like you guys to do is just introduce yourselves, maybe say how long you've been around LifeSpring, and I don't know, tell us anything else you want to tell us about yourself.
Okay, I will start. My name's Ken Harvey. My wife and I have been here for about 2.5 years or so. We tried to jump in and get involved as quickly as we could. My other claim to fame is that I just retired recently, so thank you very much. You're welcome. So anyway, that's me.
Hi, my name is Lakeiya Maxwell. I've been going to LifeSpring about 3 years. Something interesting that I did not mention in the first service is I'm sitting between a James and, is Ken short for Kenneth?
Yes.
So I'm sitting between a James and a Kenneth, and my father's name was James Kenneth.
Ah, hey, all right. I like that. Meant to be.
So, yeah. I may bring a little bit of the spirit of my father today as I speak, and so I apologize.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Hello, my name is James Mitchum, and my wife and I have been coming to LifeSprings for a little less than a year.
Okay, all right. And the first thing I learned about Jim when he walked in these doors was Dustin Wenzel. If you know Dustin, Dustin came over to me and said, well, the first thing I noticed about Jim is how tall he was. Every now and then somebody walks in church and the first thing you think is, oh my gosh, that person is really tall. And I don't know if I've told you this. I have this little book in my pocket where I write down the names of new people I meet at church so I won't forget. And I think next to your name I wrote really tall. So anyway, but Dustin came over to me and he said, because he and Crystal are teachers in the Romeoville School District, and he came over and he said, that guy used to be our boss because Jim was the superintendent of schools in the district that they teach in, and now retired, right? So what I asked you guys to do is just to tell us some stories that help us understand that being black in America often means different kinds of experiences than the experiences that those of us who are not black have even had to think about. And so I don't, you can do this in the order you did first service, or you can do whatever you want, but I'm just going to let you guys jump in.
So I'll start. Fran reminded me of something that I'm going to start with and end with before I tell the story that I want to tell. But if my father's side of the family is from South Carolina, and if probably about 70% of all the slaves that came into the United States over that 300-400 years came into Charleston Harbor. So if you know a black person, chances are their ancestors came in through Charleston. My last name is Harvey. If you go just east of Charleston a couple of miles, there's a Harvey Plantation Road. I've driven up it. That's where my family was for 8 or 9 generations. That's where I got my last name, as a lot of African Americans in this country got their last names from their slave owners, and I'm one of those. So I'll come back to that in just a second. But what I wanted to tell you about was this dynamic where I am one of the few black folks in a sea of white folks is not unusual for me. That's really been my entire life. When I was in 3rd grade, all the way up till just a few months ago, when I was in 3rd grade, my father, I have 3 brothers, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. We grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in the inner city, in the hood of Columbus. And my father, when I was in 3rd grade, sat us down and he said, you guys are going to a different school. You're going to go to the school way out on the east side of Columbus, right on the edge, almost as far away as you could be, and be in Columbus, still be in Columbus, from my neighborhood. And that's where you're going to go to school. That was right around the time of busing, and some of you may be too young to know what busing is, but it was a legislation that came in that basically said if you were in a school district, a public school district, you could go to any school you wanted to go into that district if you had a reason, right? Like you had a special needs kid or something like that or whatever. And so my dad found out that this school had classes, curriculum, teachers, resources that our home school did not have. And so me and my brother started every morning, well, 7:50, a little before 7. We'd be on the public school bus stop with our quarters, and we'd get on the bus, and we would sit for 45 minutes, get off the bus at our new school on the far east of Columbus. And that was difficult for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Number one was where I lived, the friends and the stuff that we had didn't like us anymore, right? We thought we were better than them, that we were different than them. And then the kids at the school we have didn't like us very much either. And quite frankly, we didn't like them because we blamed them on the fact that I wasn't going to school with my friends. And so I think, but they didn't like us not because of race. We were little kids, this was elementary school. I don't think that really falls into it too much. But they didn't like us because we weren't around. They didn't know us, right? We didn't play with them. We didn't live next to them. I mean, all these kids lived right in that neighborhood. And so I think that was unusual for them. And so we gave them no chance to like us. And quite frankly, like I said, we didn't like them very much either. And so that was my childhood. And my brothers and I went to they had a campus. It was an elementary school, middle school, and high school all on this campus. Very pretty. It was in parks and ponds and things around it. And after school, my middle brother and I would wait for my older brother, who was in middle school, got out later than us, an hour or so later. We'd sit in kind of the utility room of the elementary school where all the other kids went home and their moms came and got them, and they're riding around in the park, and we'd wait until my brother got out of school, and he'd come collect us, and then we'd go back to the bus stop and ride 45 minutes back to my neighborhood. And so, as I tell you that, I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch of individual circumstances around that, but I do want you to think about what that does to a kid, right? We're kind of in between worlds. And so that was my childhood. Fast forward to 3 months ago, I just retired. I worked for a global company, large global company, for the last 15 years. I was a vice president of finance for them. Every year we'd have the group of leaders, director level and above, directors, vice presidents, etc. And we get together, there's 100 of us, we get together from all over the world, we get together for 5 days or so, and hang out, do team building things, stuff like that. And of that 100, I think it was always between 95 and 110 folks. For the last 12 years, I'd done that retreat, and I was the only black person at the place. We had people from Asia, we had people from South America, we had people all over, but I was the only black person. And when I retired 3 months ago, there were 2 of us. So now that I'm retired, there's now 1 again. So yeah. I guess I got to keep the 1, I suppose. But in any event, I wanted to tell that story because I wanted you to understand that there's conflicts that arrive when you're in that situation, right? You don't know if you're being you, right? I'm being the boy that my mom raised, or if I'm being the audience, being like you, right? So that I can be promoted, so that I can be accepted. And so there's always that conflict. If you ever hang around black folks, one thing you'll realize is they act differently, and they sometimes even talk differently around white folks than they do around black folks. Yep. And that was my whole life, right? From the time I was in 3rd grade until 3 months ago. And so you learn to live with that, but it's a perspective that I think might be unique to a lot of you. So I wanted to throw that out there and let you know. Let me go back to the original story of Charleston. We did a research of my family, and found out a guy named Pompey came from the east coast of Africa. We think Senegal. Was the first person in my family tree to land in Charleston Harbor. That was in 1700-ish, a little bit before, a little bit after, somewhere around in there. So my family has been in the United States for almost 330 years. My guess is that's longer than many of you, your families. But my brothers and I were the first in our entire family to ever go to college. First generation. In 300 and whatever it is, 20 years. And the reason we did that, the reason that happened, I think, is in large part is that when I was in 3rd grade, my dad sat us down and said, we're going to go to this white school. And you'll hear more about education through this thing, but I think that I'll let you sit with that and ponder with that. I won't go into that too much, but I did want to at least let you know that's kind of my story.
It's always sobering, Ken, when you and I have these conversations. Every time I really think about the fact that your last name is the last name of the family that owned generation after generation after generation of your ancestors, as if one human being could or should be able to own another. That just blows my mind.
And that is the history of most black folks in this country.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lakeiya. Pastor Fran asked us to share stories. And since we got those questions, I've been sort of like wrestling back and forth with it. And I shared in the 9 o'clock service about some experiences in college and what it was to be a black female in a very predominantly white Ivy League institution. And there are some really interesting things that happened. But I think, I don't know why I'm getting emotional, the story I need to share today is the story of, honestly, this experience. So I shared in the 9 o'clock service, and I left I don't even know how to describe how I left. And I went and talked to Megan, and I just couldn't find the words. And I think there's a war of all of these things going on inside. So a couple weeks ago on the 4th of July, I think many of you have probably heard of what happened to Nolan Wells, a young black man who went out on a boat to celebrate the 4th of July with a group of black friends, and with a group of white friends, and he did not come back alive. And for a lot of black families, a lot of black people, we were suspicious right away. For a lot of black people, you look at Nolan Wells and you see your nephew or your brothers, people you love and you want to be protected. That happened, and all over my social media, black people were grieving. And I don't know how to say this, but I came to church and we didn't talk about it. It wasn't mentioned, didn't come up, but it was something that was heavy on my heart and heavy on the heart of so many people I know. This morning I shared stories of what it was to be a black student, and people thanked me for it, and I don't know what to do with that, because I shared stories that you could find on social media, that if you did a quick Google search, you could find out. They weren't unique. They weren't groundbreaking. They're available for you to find. Why aren't y'all finding them? Why does it take me coming up here for you all to care? I'm not sure I know how to do this, because there's so much that's going on, and I think it's reflective of what it means to be a black woman in this country, to carry loads and to walk through each day, to put on a mask of being okay, to being the people who uphold and uplift others, and to know there's so many people who are blindly walking around who just don't care. I want this conversation to be productive. I want it to move us forward. But I left this morning being like, how do they not know these things? They're not secrets. They're not things we're keeping hidden. They're on my social media feed every day with people with hundreds of thousands, close to millions of followers. If you've never heard this before, why not? I think I just left this morning feeling like there's so much. To be a black woman in America is to be joyful and angry all the time. Because how can you not be angry? In America, the maternal mortality rate for black women in America is 3 times that of white women. 3 times. And it's not just social economics, it is race, solely based on race. Because data shows that if a black woman has a black physician, that rate goes down by almost half. What are y'all doing that it's 3 times? I did juvenile justice work for a little while and studied the criminal justice system. The outcomes for black people across the board at every level are worse. It means if a black person is walking around in America, they're more likely to be pulled over. If they're pulled over, they're more likely to be arrested. If they're arrested, they're more likely to be charged. If they're charged, they're more likely to be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they're more likely to get a tougher sentence. And you can control for education, you can control for social economics, you can control for all of that, and the variable that makes it more dangerous for a black person to walk out in the street than a white person is just being black. And this is at so many levels. I went to law school and we took a property law class, and we talked about like covenants and HOAs. For years up to the 60s and 70s, there were HOAs in their covenants that had it that black people could not live in those neighborhoods. Like, this is, when we talk about stuff being systemic, it was in the law. This isn't new. It's not new. And so that's my story. I don't have a neat bow to package it in. I don't know where to go from here. But like, this isn't, we talk about not wanting to be divisive. We talk about not wanting, you all get to worry about not being divisive. You all get to worry about it not being, it being uncomfortable. I don't get to worry about comfort. This isn't comfortable for me. But it's important. It is important. And so that's what I've got. Again, I hope it's helpful. I hope it's useful. But if we were talking about stories, like this is my story right now of being a Black woman in this country, so.
Thank you for bringing your real life and laying it out there, Lakeiya, because it's only going to be helpful to the rest of us if we're willing to see, if we're willing to go look for it, if we're not comfortably diverting our eyes. I can't change the fact that I'm white, but I can change what I'm willing to hear, what I'm willing to look at, what I'm willing to read, whose story I'm willing to hear. I can be careful about adopting, and I'll come back to that, the dismissive stuff that gets floated out there that makes us all say, oh yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal, because it's a big deal. And thank you. Well, you got to follow that, brother. So,
I got a couple stories. First, concerning prejudice and racism, they're two different things. Racism is having the power to systemically impact people in a way that subjugates them. And most of us don't have that power. But a lot of us carry cultural biases and prejudices that we will bring to the table on a daily basis. Just wanted to make that clarification between the two, because I think the term racism gets thrown around a lot, but if you don't have the power to influence systems for the purpose of race or culture or sexual orientation or any of those things, it really boils down to you being kind of a prejudiced person. My father was in the military, so we traveled every 2 or 3 years. We were very transient. When he went to Korea, we settled in my mother's hometown of Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is a very prejudiced and racist place. And at the time, my experiences were very racist and prejudiced, but I didn't know that they were because it was just a norm. So my mother would send me to the grocery store and I wouldn't be allowed to go in. I had to go in, I had to traverse through an alley that had 2x4s with nails and go to a back door that was a half door, bottom closed, top open, and give my money and give my list and watch all the white people shopping in the neighborhood grocery store while I had to wait for 45 minutes for a gallon of milk, if that's how long they chose to fill my order. I remember having to drink out of this water fountain instead of that water fountain, go to this bathroom instead of that bathroom, or sit in this section of the movie theater instead of that section of the movie theater. At the time, I didn't consider it different because it was just normal at the time. Both my parents were educated. They had master's degrees. My father was a colonel in the Army. They were educated at a time when most black people were not. So they had 7 kids, and they insisted that we become educated. I still remember my mother saying, "You'll learn to speak the King's English, because you're not going to make it in this world without being able to speak properly." And she didn't like the way I pronounced my S's once, and so she sent me to speech therapy for me what seemed like years, because she didn't like the way I said S. And so as I traversed from childhood through the education system, I became an educator. Well, first of all, I played basketball at the college level, a very high college level top 5 team in the country, and my goal was to be in the NBA. And so education was just a means to that end. I got drafted, got cut, dusted off that piece of paper, said, oh, I'm a teacher. So I got a job as a teacher. As a teacher is when I began to really recognize systemic racism and the impact it was having on people of color in this country. I became a dean, and I started to really connect with at-risk kids, which predominantly were black and brown, and kind of fell in love with them because of their stories. Then I thought, well, I'm impacting kids individually, but I'd really like to impact them at a more systemic level. So I went back and got a master's degree in administration and became a school principal. And we did some significant things to change the way in which we educated our kids. And I took some risk at Bolingbrook High School, where I was the principal, because if you don't know, Valley View School District is the most diverse district in the state of Illinois. It's a third black, third Hispanic, third white. At least when I retired in 2020, I think the Hispanic population is a little larger now than the black and white population, but nevertheless, it's an extremely diverse district. And when I became the principal of Bolingbrook High School, I realized that the school was segregated. And I would say, this school is segregated, and the teachers, it's sort of like you can't see the forest for the trees because you've been doing it for so long. It's normal, sort of like when I was, in first grade, second grade, getting my groceries out of the back of the store. I said the only thing integrated about this school is they all get on the same bus and come into the same building. Once they're in this building, it's completely segregated. And they said, how so? And so I would give this test. And I would say, hypothetically, you have 2 classrooms. Each one has 30 kids in it. They're wearing school uniforms. There's nothing on the walls, no books, to indicate what type of classroom it is. And I said, one classroom has 15 black kids, 13 Hispanic kids, and 2 white kids. And the other classroom has 28 white kids, 1 black kid, and 1 Hispanic kid. And then I told you one of those classrooms was, both classrooms were 9th grade classrooms. They were both math classrooms. One was pre-algebra or intro to algebra, whatever we called it at the time. And the other was geometry. Geometry is a 10th grade class, but the smartest of kids can take it at 9th grade, the honors kids. And pre-algebra or intro to algebra was the lowest level class. It was 7th grade math at the 9th grade. I would say, how would you tell which class is which? You wouldn't. So I said, hypothetically, if I put a 357 to your head and told you got to pick which one is pre-algebra and which one is geometry, or I'm going to blow your brains out, which one would it be? And they would say, okay, the black and brown kids are pre-algebra, the white kids are honors geometry, and they would be correct. And that was across the board in every content area: science, math, social studies, English. It was all the same. And so I began to look at this very systemically, because that's an example of systemic racism, systems that are put in place to ensure that some kids are subjugated while others are not. And so we were looking at assessment scores for the ACT and SAT, and where black and brown kids were significantly lower than white kids. And we as a system would just blame the kids. But I was able to have people have an epiphany, because I would say, if you're starting black and brown kids at high school at the 7th grade level in 9th grade, and then their 8th grade level in 10th grade, and then their 9th grade level in 11th grade, you put a test in front of them that has a minimum of 11th grade skills. It's a 2-year deficit. They're not going to do well on it, and then when they don't, you blame them for being dumb, when systemically we set them up for failure. And so once I saw that happening, I asked the superintendent if I could eliminate all subcard classes. He said no. Not unless the principal at Romeoville High School agreed, which he did not. So then I came back and I said to my counselors, this is in a backdrop of getting rid of 50 teachers in 2 years that were no good. I said, we were denied the ability to eliminate these courses, but we're not putting any kids in them. They're all going to start in algebra, which is minimum college preparatory class, all of them. Well, the teachers were in uproar. Everybody was upset, but they were a little afraid of me because I was lopping the heads off, metaphorically, of teachers who were no good. And so they did it. And in 3 years, the ACT scores jumped 5 points for our black and brown kids. And they were like, how'd you do that? And I was like, I didn't put them in those stupid classes. And the superintendent said, I told you you couldn't do that. And I said, no, you told me I couldn't define them, but you didn't tell me I couldn't put them in them, so I put them in them. And that catapulted me into being the superintendent of the district. And then we put systems in place across the district that eliminated these systemic racist policies in our district that inherently subjugated black and brown kids, to the extent that when I left, they have this thing called the Illinois Interactive Report Card, and it measures districts against districts, but they'll measure like districts against like districts. And so any district that was similar to ours, none were identical to ours because we were unique in our demographics, being a third split. We outperformed every district in the state with our black and brown kids versus any other districts that had predominantly black and brown kids. And so we were very proud of that, and it helped to change people's minds and change systems in the district so that we started to recognize kids for what they were capable of rather than their social circumstances that we would use as excuses for why we can't educate them. So those are my two stories in which I feel like I've had to deal with both prejudice and racism.
You've had a really unique experience coming up in kind of the various levels of education you've worked in, where you've had the opportunity to become that person who gets to look at the system and say, hey, we should change this. What's wrong with this? Which, of course, then freaks all kinds of people out, because that's what it takes. It takes standing in a different place, or in your case, just knowing a different place, right? As a black man in America, to stand there and say, wait a minute, something about the way that we're not doing this is right. As I think about, and by the way, Kevin Farmer, who we prayed for earlier, was going to be up here with us also this morning, but of course Kevin's got a lot going on in his life. But Kevin told me a story. I guess I'm going to come off of Lakeiya being very open with us about the reality of experience this morning. Kevin told me a story. Kevin's a corporate IT guy, and a very successful career. Told me about going to a job interview many years ago, where he was sitting with one other guy waiting to be called in for this job interview, and the guy doing the interviews walked out of the office, walked to the white guy, 2 seats down, and said, Mr. Farmer? And the guy said, no. And Kevin was like, I'm Mr. Farmer. And the guy was like, oh, okay. Took him in, gave him a 1-minute interview, because it was obviously clear, no desire to hire the black guy. Didn't think a black guy could be the guy who would do a job at that level. And if you know Kevin, super accomplished guy, Or I think, hope it's okay if I say this, I think, Ken, of the times you told me, you get followed around the Target store.
Yeah, that happened just last week.
Right.
I was in Kohl's.
Right.
And
there you
the
go.
person, folding clothes in Kohl's, they were behind me. And I went to a different section. That same person folding clothes right behind me. Go to a different section. Same person folding clothes right behind me. So those sort of microaggressions are just they're standard. I mean, black folks don't even notice that.
Lakeia's nodding her head. Like that's life.
Yeah.
One thing I think that we all alluded to is that for all of us, no matter what we do, what our walk in life is, the one thing that we have to contend with is that we're black first. Like, before anything, we're black. And so I was like the black superintendent, where any other superintendent that may be white, they don't identify them as, oh, that's the white superintendent. But for me, it's like, oh, you're the black superintendent. Oh, you were the black principal. Oh, you're the black dean. Or you're the black whatever. But you're always black first. And those little microaggressions, as Ken indicated, are things that others take for granted because you're not exposed to that on a daily basis. And so, for me as a black superintendent, I knew that we all have to carry water for our people with every decision we make, because for a white person to do something stupid would be, that guy's just stupid. But
right, we don't say it's because he's white.
Right, but for a black person to do something stupid, it's like, see, that's what black people do. And so we have to carry water for everybody. And I was very cognizant of that in my position, because I was the first black superintendent for Valley View School District, and I recognized what that meant for my people. And so there was no way that I could mess up. I couldn't mess up the money, I couldn't mess up anything I did. Had to be on point. I felt like I had to be twice as good as my white counterparts in order to be looked upon as equal, because everybody saw me as black first, and they're always waiting for their shoe to drop. So I had mixed emotions about being selected for that position, because on the one hand, I knew that I deserved it, but on the other hand, I felt like there were people who were waiting for the other shoe to drop to say, see, that's why we don't put black people in positions of authority like that, because they just can't handle it. And so it's a heavy burden to carry for all of us when we traverse through life, because there's times where something heinous will happen on TV, and in my mind, I'm like, please don't be black, please don't be black, please don't be black. And if they're black, I'm like, crap, he was black. And then, because I know what that means for all of us when people who see that, who carry prejudice in their heart, will say, that's what black people do. And that's a burden we have to carry that for the most part, white folks don't.
I also wanted to add to the perspective of that, like, sometimes it's like heavier, like that, like, oh, I can't fail, but sometimes it's also just like, so I work in a school as well, and the last couple of years I've been working as a permanent sub, but like I've been subbing in like a para position in like a self-contained classroom, which like I work with a small number of students, like I'm usually off on my own, so in my mind, no one's paying attention to me, except I'm only one or two black people in the building, which means a couple things. Everybody knows who I am. It is bewildering to have people call you, but I don't know you. Like, how do you know me? Or somebody came up to me one day and was like, oh, so I saw you had a tough afternoon. How do you know I have a tough afternoon? Like, there are 500 students in this building, countless adults, but they happen to see this interaction because everyone knows who I am. And so not being like functioning through a world where it's like you can't ever, there's no anonymity. Everyone is always seeing you all the time. And so you always have to be conscious of what you're doing because you stick out all the time. Like, that's not even like a thing related to like, it just is, it's a smaller thing. It's not even a weight in the same way of like, I have to represent my people, but it's just a burden of being like, sometimes I can't have an off day. Like,
Yeah.
a mistake I make is going to be different because everyone's going to see it because all eyes are on me just because I stick out. And so
Yeah.
that's also just a reality of it that can be unfortunate.
Can I add
Yeah.
one more quick thing? I just want to say, and I said this in the first service, what Jim was talking about institutional racism and institutional overcoming institutional hurdles. It really begins in education. It really does. In that story that I told you, in 9th grade we started studying for ACT and SAT tests, which I didn't take until 11th grade. My friends back in my neighborhood never even heard of an ACT, much less were studying it for years before the test. And so how do you overcome that? I will tell you one other quick story. When my wife and I were married, we were looking around where to live, and we picked Bolingbrook because of what Jim said. It was a third. We knew our kids were going to go to that high school, and that's where we picked it. And my son, in junior high, he went to high school for math. It was a new thing. He got through all the math courses in junior high. And Jim's folks, it wasn't Jim necessarily, but his administration made it easier for him. They would pick him up in a bus in the middle of junior high school day, take him over to the high school to take math, and then take him back. And I will tell you that because a black man was the superintendent of that district, that's why that happened. It would not have happened any other place. I am convinced of that. And so, two things. One, education, that's the beginning of institutional racism, is with education. Second thing I will say, that having black folks in leadership positions, decision-making decisions, makes a difference for all the other, it makes an enormous difference. And Jim is a great example. That guy's for real. So.
I was thinking about, Lakeiya, about the story too that you told first service about your friend in college who had been convinced by others that she was only there because of affirmative action. And I was thinking about and many of you will know the story I'm referencing, that in the last year, a very popular American personality publicly made the statement that the only reason Michelle Obama, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and a list of other black women were in the positions they were in was because they stole white women's slots. And these are highly educated, highly accomplished, highly intellectual women. And part of what I want to say to you this morning, you know, these guys, I didn't even ask them what they were going to share. So you share the stories you want to share. Part of what I want to say is, just don't let whatever your bents have been, political, cultural, whatever, don't let them make you dismissive. Don't let them make you not ask questions. It's terribly, terribly important. Even the stuff we see going on with immigration. Don't be, whatever your bents are politically or whatever, when you hear people upset about stuff that's happening, don't just say, oh, that's just, they just don't know what they're talking about, or the story's been twisted. You know, the young immigrant man who was just killed in Maine. You know, this is why people are upset. Because first the administration says, you know, first ICE says, oh, he weaponized his vehicle. And then the eyewitnesses go, actually, no. And then they say, oh, well, he was backing up to flee. So he was going this direction. He was going this direction. Like the stories, you know, the stories that came out of Minneapolis, you know, the same incident would have 6 different explanations given afterwards because they were trying to find a story that could stick. And so I'm just asking you not to be dismissive of those things. I think of the story of Alia Rahman in Minneapolis. If you know that story, U.S. citizen, born in Wisconsin, living in Minneapolis, her car window smashed out. Do you know this story? She's dragged from her vehicle, she's beaten in the street, she's taken to an ICE detention center, and in the ICE detention center, she's beaten so bad that she wakes up in the hospital. She's a U.S. citizen. So I'm not trying to, I don't know what the word I want is, I'm not trying to parcel everything out, but I'm saying, like, don't be dismissive of those kind of things, and don't let other people, and I'm not saying you have been, but don't let other people tempt you to do that. Stop and say, gosh, what's going on there? Why do those kinds of things, you know, why should those kinds of things be happening? And recognize that we are in a very unique moment. We are in a moment when racism is being emboldened. Racism and prejudice is being emboldened in America. And if you don't believe that's true, from 2017 to 2018, the number of recognized white nationalist hate groups, the number of groups grew by 50%. Then it leveled off in 2020, and in 2023 it started to surge again. And that's what I mean by emboldened. All these groups are saying, like, hey, we can be out and proud now about our racism, about our white nationalism. And I'm going to tell you, I think there's a reason, a lot of sociologists think there's a reason for that, and that is because too many of our public figures are either doing and saying racist things or refusing to disavow very publicly visible racist things. And that tells racist people, like, hey, we're not going to get any pushback. I mean, and I'm not saying this to be divisive. That's the funny thing, right? Like, it's everybody's worried about being divisive. Let's talk about the truth. We have a president who told 4 congresswomen of color to go back where they came from, who said immigrants are contributing to the blood poisoning of our country. Go look up where that phrase comes from. Who refused to publicly apologize after posting a video that showed the Obama's heads on apes' bodies. And you know, when chat groups of young Republicans came out into the public view, they were all exposed. Chapters of the young Republicans all over the country. It's not, and don't get me wrong, it's not about Republican and Democrat. It just happens to be what it is, right? And they're talking about monkeys and watermelon people and using the N-word and talking about lynching. They asked the president about it. He said, oh, I don't know anything about it. Asked the vice president about it, and he said, oh, boys will be boys. Some of these guys are in their 30s, and they consider themselves future political leaders, and this stuff won't be disavowed. So if you're a person who thinks people are making too much of this in this moment, I'm trying to explain to you why people are making much of it. Because people are saying and doing these things, and our most visible leaders, including many who name the name of Christ, will not disavow this stuff, will not say, no, that's wrong. So, if you put that next slide up there, this is the group that marched on July 4th on our 250th anniversary. If you guys have that next slide. That I didn't talk about that. Trump administration ordered the removal of references to slavery from our national parks, including from the original presidential home where George Washington did have slaves in Philadelphia. And all these organizations, including the city of Philadelphia, sued the administration to get these plaques replaced to tell the story of our history, right? And fortunately, that does seem to be happening. And then this next slide is this group that marched in Washington on our 250th, on July 4th, on our 250th anniversary, Patriot Front, white nationalists. And what I want you to notice is who they've got up on that sign. Part of me wants to say, wait a minute, that's my Jesus. But then another part of me goes, that's not my Jesus. My Jesus is not a white nationalist, right? And so, again, not to get anybody in a political lather, this is just the stuff that's happening. I've never seen it happen before in my adult lifetime. And so it is concerning for me. And I just think we're the people, we're the Jesus people. So we should be the loudest voices in our culture for the dignity and equality of all people. We are the people who have a Bible that says in Christ there is not slave or free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, right? This is the Jesus who almost got himself killed for refusing to other non-Jews. They tried to throw him off a cliff because he insisted on the equality of non-Jewish people. So if we say it in positive terms, here's what I would say. We get to be the people who stand up for the dignity and equality of all people as made in the image of God. This is our theology, right? We get to be the people who say that the good news of the gospel is for the flourishing of all human beings. And I just want to say, as your pastor, that's where I want to be. It's not political for me, but it is ethical. And that's where I want to be, and I hope it's where you want to be. And we have gone way over time, and so we're just going to order lunch, and we're all going to... No, I'm just kidding.
Pastor Fran, I know we're over time, but can I say one quick thing?
Yes, you
It'll
can.
be 2 minutes. Okay, so sorry. I feel like I just really had to say this. There are two things I want to... that has two parts. When it comes to racism in America, there's something I want you guys to understand. There's two separate big two separate ways it impacts the country. One of them we talked about is systemic racism. I come from a legal background, and it talks about the impact, things that are in place that impact Black people, often brown people, impacts them more severely than it does the rest of the society. And he talks about it in schools, that the way our systems are set up, that it affects Black and brown people more often than the white population. Often in those situations, there are just neutrally good things you can put in place that help improve the outcomes for Black and brown people. The things he were doing in his school were just neutrally good, smart things, and then it lifted up the tide for Black and brown people. And so if you're thinking about, there are all these things that are happening in society that are affecting Black and brown people in such a negative way, understand that there are neutral things. I saw this thing where there was a police department that changed the way that they were stopping people. Instead of stopping them for little ticky-tack things, it was safety things that he stopped them for, and they found that the disparities in race change. They're just neutral, smart things that you can do. The other part of it, though, is there is actually we talked about the difference between racism and prejudice. A term that I really heard recently that I really like is anti-Blackness. There's just a rise in anti-Blackness in this world, in this country that's going on. There's been a rise in lynchings in the South, of Black people being found hanging in public places. The things that were said about our Supreme Court justice, about Michelle Obama, those things are just anti-Black things that are on the rise. And it's so steeped in our society right now that sometimes we don't notice them. That comments will come along and we just let them flow over. One of the things I found that even for myself, I know that there are things that in society that have just happened that I've heard and I've gotten used to, that I have taken for granted. For me, one of the things that I started doing is the things I enjoy reading. I read more Black authors. On my social media page, I make sure it's full of Black and brown influencers who are sharing their stories, who are sharing data. If you listen to music, make sure that the things, if you want to counter the noise that's happening that you know isn't what you want to be hearing, make sure whatever you do, make sure it includes the voices of Black and brown people.
Yeah.
Don't let honestly, don't let white people tell you about Black people, about brown people, about immigrants. If you want to know about Black people, if you want to know about brown people, listen to them. Read their stories. Listen to their music. Visit their churches. Go to the places where they are, if you really have a heart to listen and to learn. And I don't know if I should have said go to their churches, because every church is a church. Like, all of our churches are all of our churches. But there can be cultural differences in the way that different cultures, and so if you're interested in that, go visit a predominantly Black church. Go visit a predominantly Hispanic church. Go visit those places and see what is there, what do other parts of the body of Christ look like, value. Yeah. So
I want to thank you guys for doing this with me this morning and for doing it for 2 services. And I don't know if all of you realize how blessed we are to have these friends who would get up and do this, because for people like me, white people like me, in our culture right now, and in the community of Jesus, this is exactly what we need. And in my own imperfect way, I hoped that this morning, by having you guys up here, we could do something good. And thank our friends for doing this, will you?